Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to today's elephant episode of Sex, Love, and Elephants. What you're going to hear next is a recording of a Dharma class, a meditation Buddhist class I gave about 2 weeks ago on the themes of why aren't we more happy? Why does our mind pick on the negative things? Why do we try to buy stuff or do stuff to feel better? That's not always bad, as you'll hear, but why are we so puzzled about the fundamental ground of what leads to more happiness and less suffering? So without further ado, we'll dive into that class. And I'll remind you, if you want to know more of these teachings, make sure you subscribe to this wonderful podcast. And you can also watch the videos on YouTube. Visit my website, drcherylfraser.com, and sign up to receive weekly emails from me. Let's all together figure out how to be happy for no reason, how to have better, healthier, more delightful relationships with the person we love, and how to be a better person. But let's hear what Buddhism and meditation has to say as you listen to this elephant episode. Deeper knowledge, the quest for happiness continues. I was contemplating a number of themes tonight, and what I'd like to talk about are some universal experiences that none of us get to escape. To quote one of my favorite bands, The Clash, and their beautiful cover of the song, "I Fought the Law and the Law Won," reality will win. We don't get to change reality. We don't get to change at the most simple level that we're born into a mortal human body. We're all going to die. Looking at our ages, probably at least in the next 60, 70 years, we'll all be dead. There's a few reasonably young folk in the room. And this is reality. And we can fight it as hard as we want. I guess we do, a lot of us. And maybe some of those are wholesome. They would be reasonably wholesome decisions to maybe eat in a supportive manner within reason, to try to avoid ingesting like toxic, poisonous waste, being facetious but not entirely, ways to support our life force, our bodies, our minds for perhaps more longevity. And ideally, I think some of us who are getting a little on in years, having our latter decades be ideally fairly healthy decades, taking care of our fitness and flexibility and balance, things like that. So we can fight reality a little bit. And some of those choices are arguably wholesome. It's arguably wholesome to make choices to help support our body and mind in the longer term, because it can allow us, from a Dharma point of view and from a decent human being point of view, to stick around longer and maybe do more good, be kind, help others, etc. But the fact is, we'll all die. Don't shoot the messenger. It wasn't my decision. And we're born into this mortal body, and yet so much of our lives, certainly I'm guilty of this as well, we act as though we have forever. Anybody ever fall into that? I'll get to it later. That's really important to me, but there's this kind of more fun thing that's easier. I'll do it first, and I'll get to the other thing later, like, meditation retreats, maybe not working as hard because it's hurting your health, maybe creating more time for wholesome activities, both joyful trips and wholesome people, but training your mind, whether this is your chosen path or not. Training our mind, well, why? Why would we train our mind? It seems like a lot of work. That wasn't the easiest 20 minutes ever for many of us, and it can seem quite boring and quite tedious, and goodness knows I'm with you there. Try doing it for 10 hours a day. Boring and tedious at times. And in there might be moments or even stretches where it's neither boring nor tedious. And to me, those are the glimpses of possibility for the mind to be calmer and more bright. But to put it most simply, why meditate? Why practice Dharma? Why spend our evenings here in a beautiful, actually acting like spring evening for the first time in a couple of weeks, when there are many other enjoyable and arguably reasonably important things we could do instead? We all have our slightly unique reason for being here. But I would put out that the majority of us are stick people, not carrot people, as one of my Dharma friends says. The carrot people, and there may be one or two in the room, and I applaud you, are reasonably stress-free in your life. You've got quite a good, wholesome life. You feel blessed, and look where we live and where we're born, and that we have food and water and reasonable health. And you might come to listen to Dharma or some other things out of curiosity, like going for a carrot. I feel pretty good, but I'm curious to learn more. I'm curious to maybe feel a bit better. I'm curious to explore states of mind that I've heard of or thought of or dreamt about. But the majority of us are stick people. We come to the Dharma because we're being beaten by a stick of pain and suffering, anxiety, despair, heartbreak, or the smaller versions of that where we look at our wonderful, I'm going to make a generalization here, but at our wonderful, fairly comfortable, something like middle-class North American lives. And we think, is this it? Especially if we followed the prescription of North America, which is, be a reasonably decent person, get a reasonable job that pays the bills, be reasonably kind, ideally find reasonably nice people to hang out with, maybe marry one of them and maybe create new little people together if that's your jam, which is a beautiful thing. And you'll be happy. It's a really good model. Has it worked for you? So many in this room, reasonably good health, jobs that have some value. Probably all of us can mostly pay our bills, and maybe some stress involved there, but we're doing, okay. We're not losing our roof over our head, probably. Why aren't we happier? Because it's kind of ridiculous, don't you think, that we're not? We're objectively and quantitatively and statistically in something like the top 3 to 1% of the planet in terms of human beings on the planet, in terms of the ease of our lives. We're not going to go home, drink water from our tap, and die from poisoning tonight. It's very unlikely. Our children, if we have them, are likely to survive infancy and hopefully to a ripe old age. So the stick people, I'm certainly one, it's the suffering that we experience in the midst of a pretty great circumstance that might drive us to seek something that might help us understand why we're not happier in the midst of such bounty. What did you have for supper tonight? It was probably pretty yummy and healthy, or not so healthy, but delicious, right? So much bounty. You think, honestly, and I'm not being facetious or trying to minimize it at all, but we should all be freaking joyous right now. We probably came here on a bicycle or a car that works. We're going to go home to a place that's warm and has furniture in it. There are people in our lives who probably care about us and will come help us when we need help. Unbelievable wealth and riches compared to the majority of the planet. And I certainly found myself through my teens and 20s and right up till now, at times, sitting in wonder and being internally miserable, having anxiety, fear, self-referenced. What about me? Am I going to be okay? Not because I'm particularly screwed up or particularly intelligent to figure it out, but because I fought the law and the law won. When you try to fight the truth of reality, we're mortal, we're going to die. These human bodies are subject to illness, old age, and death. Our mental well-being does not seem to be broadly filled with compassion and ease, patience and grace, humor, and the ability to roll with the punches easily for the majority of us. A small, arguably really minuscule thing can send the mind into negativity and upset. I often use the example, it's such a Vancouver Island example of, going for a ferry and the ferry's canceled due to weather. Or, gosh, you foolishly didn't make a reservation on a summer weekend. You should know better. You really should. We all know summer weekend, you better have a reservation or you might be 3/4 sailing white. And so you have a plan. Your reality is, I'm getting over to Vancouver to see the Canucks game when that used to be a thing. Or over to see a concert or see a friend. And maybe it's time sensitive. And if you miss the ferry, you're going to miss the thing. Maybe it's really important, your friend's wedding. If you try to hop on Harbor Air, you may or may not get there. But how much suffering have each of us created for ourselves with a delay in travel? How much suffering, and you don't have to admit this, but self-diagnose. How many of us have created suffering because the Starbucks line was long? Like so ridiculous how quickly we can find ourselves, if we're not monitoring our mind, if we're not looking at a bigger picture, being distressed by pretty minuscule things in reality. Now, what about the big stuff you should be asking? Because that would be a very wise question. What about cancer? What about tragedy? What about someone you love saying, I want you out of my house, out of my life, and out of my marriage? I don't want you anymore. What about being fired? And let's up the ante on that. What about being fired unfairly due to false accusations by someone who wanted to stab you in the back? What about the bigger losses and tragedies, the bigger realities? You can fight those too. You can fight cancer, and hopefully modern medicine and other good things will help you put that into remission, and even with many cancers these days, recover. But the fact is, reality sucks in some way. Mortality and loss and suffering is real. Oh, great. I'm so glad I came here. I could have been out playing baseball in the sunshine. No, let's talk about death and cancer. Thanks, Cheryl. But this is part of life. Do we roll over and play dead? Do we give up? Sometimes. I have at times, for periods of time. Do we say, it's just all so hard? This is just the way it is. Well, that's tricky, because it is the way it is on one level. If the cancer's in our body, the cancer's in our body. It may or may not hasten the end of our life, and it may or may not be painful and really quite awful. If the person's walked out and doesn't love you anymore, they don't love you anymore. If you've lost your job nefariously, you've lost your job nefariously. So it is what it is. That's the first level. But what we do with that reality is up to us. Now, that may sound contradictory, because I started off saying I fought the law and the law won. What I mean is the law of the cancer, the law of the not being loved, the law of the nefarious being fired unfairly. If that's going to stay, it's going to stay. That part you can fight and you can't change it. But the really great message in Dharma and in other great teachings, sometimes depending on the teaching and how they approach this thing, but I'll limit my comments to Dharma. That's where I have a modicum of experience and expertise. The great thing about Dharma is it says, even when reality is really, really tough, it is up to me, it is up to you how we interact with that reality, what we do with our mind to allow us to coexist with the toughest stuff. And that should be very good news, because it means we're not, as we sometimes think, victims of circumstance. Circumstances happen. Some of them are completely out of our control. But we're not a victim of what happens next. It's up to us to say, who can I be in this moment? How will I meet these adverse circumstances? Who will I choose to be? Now, I fail. I suspect you do too. I don't meet every tough or minor irritation, every tough circumstance or minor irritation with my best mind, with my most open heart, with my most flexible self, oh, wow, okay, that was highly unexpected. Someone stole my car while I was teaching. That's I can freak out and blame the world and the horrible people in Nanaimo, because nobody where I live would ever do that. Blah, 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 blah. All sorts of stories fighting reality. Or I can go, okay, my car's gone. Hopefully one of my lovely friends is still here and give me a ride to maybe file a report or back home to deal with it tomorrow. How we deal with the tough stuff determines whether we suffer. Let me repeat that one. Tattoo it on your arm. Or a better quote than this. But the concept, how we deal with the circumstance determines whether we suffer or not the circumstance. So in terms of real life, there have been quite a few developments in my partner and I's life this month, as I'm sure there have been in yours. One of our dearest, closest people in our life was diagnosed with cancer and died within about a month. A Dharma practitioner, a dear mentor and friend, one of the most important people in our world. Another dear friend, she who gifted me these socks, her husband is very ill down in the States with cancer that has raged back, and it is unclear what the future will bring, but it's not looking good. I'm sure you have your own really challenging stories happening right now. Many of us in this room, because I have the pleasure to know a lot of you quite personally, have lost a dearly beloved one quite recently as well. A life partner, a parent, even a child. There are tough dukkha's, sufferings in this life. How we meet them is what determines who we are. So how can Dharma help us? I really like that question, and I think we should ask ourselves that a lot, because it's not meant to be, Dharma meditation is not meant to be some esoteric head trip of acting like we're all above all that and we're all special. And if we just apply this technique, all the nasties will go away. Those can be common misperceptions and doesn't mean anyone's foolish or bad. But I like to help bust those preconceptions, because Dharma and meditation aren't a panacea to fix the world. And they're not even a panacea to fix us. Really deep Dharma is actually pretty challenging, because it says, sorry, everybody, all the things you've ever learned won't work in terms of happiness. Being a good person, having a decent job, lovely family, giving to charity, just being a good being isn't enough. Oh, lo, I wish it was. Please do all those things. Please be a good being. Give to charity. Love and be kind and forgive to those in your world, even those you don't like very much. All of those are really important. But those of you that are doing a fair bit of that, a fair bit of the time, which I bet's everybody in the room, and I don't expect any of us are perfect, I'm certainly not, has it obliterated your suffering? Are you in states of calm, curious, happy, loving equanimity? Equanimity is a word we don't use a lot in English regular speech. It's a great word, though. It's a translation of the word upekkha from Pali, and essentially it means to be with things as they are. Some of the translations, when you break down the root words, are to look over with grace, right? So to look over the fact that there's cancer or death, to look over the loss, to look over your house burned down tonight, with grace, to be with it as it is, which is different than fighting reality. It's the opposite, actually. It's to be with reality as it is. Because if your house burnt down, your house is gone. It's just that simple. You can't wish it back into being, but you can sure suffer even much more than the loss of your home and your possessions by the wishing it hadn't happened, by the why did this happen to me, by the looking for someone's to blame. Doesn't help. Doesn't help. Many of you know, but it bears repeating because it's part of the analogy I just sketched out there. I made the connection as I spoke, that I was in Santa Rosa, California in about 2017 when there were horrific fires that tore through. Over 65 people died that night. Hundreds of houses burned to ash. I was visiting the friend who gave me the socks and staying at her home, and her daughter woke me up at about 2 a.m. I was sleeping in her daughter's room, and her daughter loved it when I visited because she got to sleep on the couch, which was very exciting. She came to wake me up and said, "Hey, Auntie Cheryl, I smell smoke and the lights aren't on." I said, "Okay, honey, I'll come look." And I came and looked, and the sky was glowing red. I had no idea what danger we were in because I didn't understand California fires. But I said, "We better wake up your mom and dad," which we did. And they looked out and they said, "Get in the car." And we essentially drove for our life through burning freeways, burning buildings, and their entire subdivision, about 26 houses burned to ash in the next couple of hours. Everything gone to ash, everything. Even my suitcase, because I didn't grab it. So it really happens. It happens to us. It happens to people we love. And my friends were like, the 2 adults, the 2 teenage kids, myself and the dog all got out. We were good. It wasn't easy, wasn't fun, but we were good. We were good. Other people returned to the house site where their house had been and shot themselves. right? How do we react to these dukkha's, these big, difficult, painful losses? We can't control that night that all those houses burned and so sadly, so many people died. Who we choose to be, how we don't fight the reality that your house and all your possessions are gone, but we say we're alive, we live another day, we're all safe, we're very lucky. We begin in our own way to rebuild. I use a dramatic personal story because you've all got stories probably more dramatic than that. There's so much dukkha in each of our lives, our beautiful, wonderful, fairly privileged lives. And it helps to be reminded it's not easy, some of this reality. Do we want to roll over and play dead? Or do we want to do what in our own ways, whether you realize it or not, there's an inkling or a longing or a curiosity or a willingness to see, is there another way to work with my mind? You may have never conceptualized it that way, especially those of you I don't know very well. You might not have come tonight thinking, is there another way to work with my mind? You may have come with a similar sort of question, a good one, like, I'd like to be able to sleep better or have less anxiety, be able to calm my mind when I'm having obsessive worry. These are excellent sticks. These are the sticks, the beatings, the pains that led me to my first Dharma classes and meditation 25, 28 years ago, was anxiety, not being able to sleep, not being able to turn off the mind. And this little inkling, is this it? Is this it? This pretty easy life with reasonable opportunities. Pretty much if myself and my peers worked hard, we achieved something. We achieved a level of security and safety. And I was one of those people, perhaps many of you were as well, that even when things were pretty easy, there was a sense of restlessness. There was a sense of, is there more? But because, like a reasonable number of North Americans, more traditional religion didn't really resonate for me, and I have my own somewhat immature views about that. I wasn't seeking in a church, or maybe that would have helped, but I was seeking in psychology. You may not know, by training, I'm a psychologist. 13 years in university, studying the mind, studying biology, studying serotonin, dopamine, hormones and behavior, to try to figure out what I now realize what I was trying to figure out. I had a much fancier, complex question in mind, like, what's the meaning of life? Why aren't we happier? Why is long-term love so difficult? Why? What I was really trying to figure out, to boil it down, thank you, Shakyamuni Buddha, why do we suffer? 13 years of university, best schools, best training, incredible training. I'm very grateful for it. I did not walk out with a PhD and one of the top postdocs in North America. I did not walk out able to answer the question, why do we suffer? I wrote a really long dissertation, about 4 people read it, but I couldn't answer, why do we suffer? Until I heard the Four Noble Truths. And I thought, what a bloody waste of time those 13 years were. No, not entirely. The Four Noble Truths, if you're not familiar with them, are the 4 teachings of the fundamentals of Buddha Dharma, taught by Shakyamuni Buddha. It's his second teaching. His first teaching was to the 5 or 6 arahats, or highly developed meditators he'd studied with. That's a story for another day. That he ran into on a path, allegedly, after Buddha Shakyamuni became fully awakened, and they looked at him and said, dude, what happened to you? Because they could tell he'd kind of attained something, the thing they all were trying to attain that they didn't know what it was. And he explained, and when he explained, they became, several of them immediately awakened, and they said, you must teach this. And he said, I don't see how I could. And they said, please, you must teach this. And he said, allegedly, perhaps there are a few with only a little dust in their eyes. And the way that's interpreted is folks like us. We've got a bit of dust in our eyes. We're a bit confused, but maybe we can hear the teaching. Everyone can, by the way. And so then, as they begged and said, please, he gave the first official public teaching of his awakening at the Deer Park, which is in Sarnath, India, hour or so from Varanasi. I went there with a few other Dharma bums once, And it's just kind of a big park with like a little thing in the middle, and it doesn't look like much. And you stand there and think, the literal historical Shakyamuni Buddha stood here and taught the Four Noble Truths. Wow. And the Four Noble Truths are most simply the explanation to the cause of suffering and the prescription for the cessation of suffering, and then some guidelines on how to do that. Very simply. Very familiar to some of you, maybe a bit new for others, but again, sometimes it's helpful to hear in a new way. It helps me to hear over and over them. What leads to suffering? Cheryl, that had 13 years of university trying to understand the human mind. I don't know a whole bunch of stuff. Can't explain it. Buddha, very simply, the reason we suffer is because things change. Wait for it. That's impermanence, anicca. And things don't always change in the way we want. Okay, very clear, right? You want the ferry to leave on time, it doesn't. You want your house not to burn down, it does. You want your wife, husband, lover to still want you, they don't, right? Things change. Some of those changes are very highly unwelcome. Some are just vaguely annoying or a slight small irritation. The milk's sour. Oh, too bad. I guess I'll have to have no milk in my tea. Just a small suffering. Big sufferings, death, despair, tragedy, trauma, murder, horror, war. The reason we suffer is because things change, and some of those changes are not what we want. First noble truth. Second noble truth. The deep cause of suffering is that we cling to wanting it to be different. We don't accept things the way they are. We fight reality. I fought the law and the law wins. We suffer. Okay. Things change. Some of those changes we don't want. First noble truth. Second noble truth. We cling and we try to manipulate, control, micromanage guilty reality so it works for us. And it is a fool's errand. That doesn't mean, by the way, it's really important. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try to change unwholesome things. Right? Doesn't mean you should just give up, go, oh, that's reality. And apparently if I fight reality, it'll win. That's a misunderstanding. If there's compassionate, wise things to do to change unfavorable circumstances for self or others, do so. But there are things that no matter what you do, you can't change. The Serenity Prayer says it really beautifully, right? God, grant me the courage to change the things I can, to accept the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. Same teaching in a way as the first two noble truths. Things change, not always in the way we want. We suffer when we don't accept that, when we cling and want it to be different. If that's all there was, we'd go, okay, that's a pretty good explanation for why I suffer. Think about it right now. Think of a small or a large pain or suffering in your life right now. And then apply the first truth. Something changed, not in the way you wanted. Or the flip side would be, I want it to be different and it isn't. Check. I really want it to be different and I'm trying to make it different and it's not going to work. Check. Your own experience will illustrate how easy and accurate those first two noble truths are. The third one is the cure. So the cause is things change. The cause of the suffering is we don't accept that, we fight it, at least some of the time. The cure is very simple, and most of us can't do it right away, which is stop doing that. The cure is don't cling. Don't fight reality that can't be changed. Don't try to make it different. Don't elaborate a story about why did my house burn down? Why am I so unlucky? Why did PGE have faulty wires, which apparently ended up being part of the cause, and sparks and all that horror happened because of that partly, et cetera, et cetera. Why was it so windy that night? Why was it so dry? Why were the trees right in the place where the conflagration happened? I'm not saying that wise people shouldn't figure those things out to prevent future harm, but when we end up in despair of how they shouldn't have happened, but it did, huge suffering. So the cure is to not do that, is to accept what is and begin rebuilding, ideally with compassion and grace. How easy is that? Well, I don't know about you, but I can make an educated guess. Simply seesaw clinging is really hard. I'm losing here. It might be Shantideva. I don't think I've got that right, so don't quote me. But one of the Tibetan saints says, seesaw clinging and enlightenment will arise. John, just stop clinging. Boom, full Buddha right there in the green shirt. Switch seats. If you're full Buddha now, we should switch seats. I'm completely okay with that. So seesaw clinging, the word's a little odd to us. So cease wanting it to be different. Accept, radical acceptance of what is. And you will not suffer. Let's take a heartbreak. Many of us have been through a variation of a heartbreak, maybe more than once. If we can, with dignity, grace, and love for the other, just accept that they don't want to be in relationship with anymore and they're gone. If we can simply fully accept that, we won't suffer. We'd have love and affection and wish them well, authentically and completely. Pretty hard to do, but that's what no clinging would feel like. What about approaching our death? As my dear friend Michael did, my Dharma friend. We had the lucky circumstance to visit him. It was unlikely, it all happened very fast, but we were able to go to Vancouver and visit him for half an hour about 4 days before he died. It's about 3-ish weeks ago or so. And he was in a great deal of pain and very, very thin, but his mind was still good. And he was a strong Dharma practitioner, a very wise being. And we joked and we hugged and we told him how much he meant to us. And we shared a few stories. And after about 30 minutes, he said, I think it's time for you to go. He was very tired. We said, yeah. And I said, well, because he had chosen to access the MAID program, the medical assistance in dying, and he knew in a couple of days he'd be leaving the planet. And I said, you still got your mind? And he said, that's the only thing I was afraid of, to not have my mind at the moment of transitioning. He had let go. He had a beautiful daughter. She was set. He was in hospice care in her home. He'd been doing a bit of art with her that morning. He had let go. He was in a really good state of equanimity and grace and kindness and peacefulness. I hope, if I'm fortunate enough to be cognizant when my time comes, it's not sudden and I don't get that chance, to be in that state. Seesaw clinging and enlightenment will arise. So the cure is, if we go out and our cars are all stolen, to more or less be like, meh, it's a car, no clinging, inconvenient, that's all it is, which actually ultimately is really all it is. It'd be inconvenient if our cars went poof. It would be, that's all. It doesn't have to be a tragedy or a drama or spend the next weeks with vitriolic Facebook posts about whatever, about your car. It's a waste of time and it hurts and it doesn't make you feel better. So I suggest you don't. It's up to you. So I said there was 4 noble truths. You're smart, you can count. We've got the first one, things change and not always in the way we want. The second one is we fight reality, we cling, we want it to be different, and that causes our suffering, not the actual change, but our reaction to it. The third is stop doing that. Stop clinging, and that's hard, and the Buddha was compassionate. And the Buddha then gave us a 4th noble truth. The 4th noble truth is the prescription, the pathway, the set of things we can do to help us cling less. Because when we cling less, or not at all, there's no suffering. And that's the Eightfold Path. And I won't go into that in any depth this evening out of the interest of time. But the Eightfold Path, you can think of it more, a path always implies beginning, middle, and end, which is a little misleading. It's fine. But a more accurate way to think of it is an 8-piece pie. That these are 8 aspects of your life, how you work with your mind, your speech, your heart, your meditation, to help support you to cling less, to help you support you to have more wisdom, to help support you to see more clearly, to help support you to let go more easily. And these include things like effectively wise or right view and right intention is a little bit what I'm talking about tonight, which is arguably we had right view and right intention, wiseness to come tonight. Not because I'm all that, But because part of our minds and hearts, our depth is like, I'd like to learn more about this experience of being human or working with my mind, or why regular happiness is ethereal and changeable, or whatever your questions were. I'd like to learn to meditate. Excellent question. Excellent motivation. So how we see the world, if we see the world as, and I'm going to vastly oversimplify, not to insult anyone's intelligence, but to make the point, if we see the world as, if I got lots of fancy, expensive stuff, and I'm wealthy, and I've got sexy friends, and I'm super good looking, and I'm a movie star, life is great, right? Again, not to insult your intelligence, silly example, but it kind of captures an underlying sense we've got in North America, and I'm sure elsewhere, that if we just get the stuff and get the circumstances just so, we'll be fine, right? And we often live this way without really meaning to. Like, we get stuff. Stuff isn't inherently good or bad. It's your attraction or clinging to it that could be problematic, and it may not be at all. I'm not saying go give everything away and live with one robe and one bowl. There are reasons to do that, and it's to help us not cling. By the way, that's why monks and nuns and ordained persons are only meant to have 2 robes, a bowl, and not handle money and everything else. It's not some draconian old religious thing necessarily. It's a literal practice of having very little to cling to not acquiring. So we don't have to go give everything away, although it's a great practice to give some stuff away, especially to give away stuff you like and you'd rather keep. Ways to do what? To kind of the clinging, I don't want to give that away because I really like it. It's special to me. And choosing to give it away and explore what it's like to let go of something that arguably isn't super important. Whatever that lovely object is, it might have sentimental meaning or financial value, but really, if we all died tomorrow, would that object matter anymore? What would matter if we died tomorrow? What if we had five hours and we knew in 5 hours we're all going to peacefully in a nanosecond drop dead, and some magic force took care of all our loved ones and family and everybody's financially fine? What would you do with your 5 hours? Hug your stuff? I really hope not. If so, stay after. Let me talk to you. Let me sort you out. But you might hug your people. You might hug your pets. You might go for a walk and really look at the trees and the ocean. You might make amends for things you've done that weren't skillful and people you'd like to leave in peace. You might go have a beautiful meal and really taste every bite. You might meditate. You might cry. You might make love. But you probably wouldn't cuddle your stuff. So what's it really about? So these 8 aspects of living a good life are to help us reduce our reliance on the stuff and the ease and the good health and all those things that I hope we all enjoy for a good long time. But clinging to, that's why I'm happy, is I have a nice house. That's why I'm happy, I have a wonderful partner. That's why I'm happy, I have work that I love. Again, I hope you have those things. But when we cling to them and we mistake them for the cause of our ease and happiness, we are in trouble. So I mentioned 2. Our intention and our view, a little more complex, but just to sketch those out. And then the Buddha taught about how to have a right or a wise livelihood. What do we do with our time, with our paid or unpaid work, our days? Are we, for the most part, engaged in fairly wholesome activities, trying to do them well? That doesn't mean you have to be a neurosurgeon or a minister. It might be that you're a ditch digger, but you do it well. You take pride in your work. You dig a fine ditch, and you're nice to people when they walk by. You go, how's it going? Oh, have a good day. Lovely dog. It's the heart and the intention we bring to the work. It's not so much the work itself. Unless your work is innately harmful. You're selling drugs that kill people deliberately. You're selling them without any care for the, you're a firearms dealer. You you create huge profit, knowing your factories are pouring mass poison into streams that are giving children cancer, and you're super aware of it, but you want the money. These are unwholesome livelihoods. But almost all of our livelihoods or volunteer or way we live our life can be wholesome, depending the attitude we bring to it. So that's one of the 8. Another is a wholesome or wise speech. That's tricky because we talk a lot. You notice that? We talk a lot out here. We talk even more in here. And the Buddha taught 5 or 6 very clear teachings about speech. We could do a whole retreat on it. We should. Your speech should be free of slander. It should be wholesome. It should be to encourage harmony and intelligence and good discourse. We shouldn't have idle chatter, gossip, lies, unkind speech, harsh, abusive speech, etc. It's a tremendous life study that I will be studying for many lifetimes. At times, I use my speech skillfully and well to help self and others. At times, I've epically failed, to quote my nieces. I titled my company, my corporation, Right Speech Incorporated about 28 years ago because I wanted every time back then I'd sign checks, in the old days. Every time I signed a check, I'd see Right Speech Incorporated. It was just a way to remind myself, keep working on wise, right speech. Most of what I do for a livelihood involves speaking, teaching, therapy, teaching courses, writing, podcasting, things like that. I use a lot of words. And it's a reminder, can I attempt to aspire to have my words be valuable, filled with wisdom and compassion? Any of you who know me at all know I fail a lot. We all do. But when you aspire, you can keep doing better. So how you make your livelihood, how you use words, how you use your internal words. I'm a loser. It's all my fault. They're stupid. I'm better than them. All these ways, are you being kind and right and skillful and honest in your internal speech? That's tricky. Work with that. So how we live our life, our livelihood, paid or not, how we speak, right speech, right livelihood, right action. Our actions, everything from driving home today. We see someone on the side of the road with a flat tire or a dead battery or something. Do we stop? Do we not stop? Do we blaze on by because it's inconvenient? Do we stop even if we don't really know how to fix a tire, just to say, hey, can I call someone? Or, because maybe they're standing there and their cell phone's dead. I don't know. I'm not saying you have to, but what are our actions? Are they motivated at our best, I hope, by compassion and wisdom? Now, if you're in a really, really scary part of town and you're alone and someone's pulled over, you might have to think wisely whether pulling over would be a wise or an unwise decision. But you could phone BCAA or the police or something and say, hey, someone's car seems to be in trouble at XY street. Use wisdom, but do we act with wisdom and compassion? And when we don't, do we clean that up? Do we clean that up? Do we make amends? Do we own our shit? Do we apologize? Do we try to do better? It's a beautiful Tibetan teaching. Oh, the beautiful practice of Vajrasattva. You can spend 3 months, 10 months, 12 months, your life meditating 10 hours a day on purifying your mind and making amends and letting go. And it's beautiful. It's for another day, but beautiful. So where are we at? We're at 5 of the 8. Your view, your intention, your livelihood, your action, and your speech. I wasn't planning on teaching this tonight, so hopefully I'll get them all. And then we get into the meditation part of that 8-piece pie, which is right effort, right concentration or samadhi, and right mindfulness. We'll group those together, but 3, remember what these are? The 8 ways the Buddha said. If we cultivate these 8 things, these practices, it will help us cling less. What happens if we cling less? We suffer less. So it's a pretty good prescription. So the last 3 are to do with effort in your life, in cleaning up your speech, and it particularly speaks, because this is the meditation cluster, to effort in your meditation, right? I'm guilty sometimes. being on retreat or even practicing at home where I intended to meditate for 45 minutes, and at minutes 38, I'm kind of good. My knee hurts and I'm bored and I'm kind of hungry and tea sounds delicious. And I might just, 38 minutes is good. That's not wise effort. Is it a terrible travesty? You're going to get kicked out of Buddha school? No. But it's speaking to almost everything else that we've achieved in our life took effort. Our careers, our parenting, and on your garden. If you're a gardener, that took some effort. You didn't just go magic flower poof. Things take effort. And when we get sloppy and lazy in things that matter to us, they tend to slide. So the idea is, kind of bad news, real news. You're going to have to make effort to improve at anything. 13 years of university. Worked my ass off. So many of you did as well. Nobody thought that was crazy. Nobody. They thought it was good. Of course. Wow, that's cool. Then I said, I'm going on a 3-month meditation retreat. People thought I was nuts. Why would you spend 3 months doing nothing? But 13 years at university made sense, right? So just different cultural norms, different understandings of what the value is. So right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration are about really developing the mind so we can do those other things more skillfully. Because when the mind is calmer and clearer, arguably, and this is just regular life, Dharma or not, when your mind is calmer and clearer, it's a little easier to tell what's wholesome and unwholesome. It's wonderful Dharma language. I like those translations, kusala and akusala, wholesome and unwholesome, instead of good or bad, or good or evil. Those actually aren't terms really in Buddha Dharma. It means, is this activity wholesome? How do you define wholesome? Well, the way Buddha defined it is, wholesome leads away from suffering. It reduces suffering. That's a wholesome act for self or other. Unwholesome, as you've already guessed, leads towards suffering or creates suffering for self and other. So we want to develop wholesome and reduce unwholesome. That's kind of hard to do. Ever notice? When you're busy, stressed, pressured, impatient, overwhelmed, overbooked, it's harder sometimes to discern what's wholesome and not. You lose your biscuit. You get snappy, impatient, rude, mean to yourself, start to get anxious or panicky. When we can work with the mind, train the mind to be calmer and more clear a little more often, maybe than even more often, we can make better decisions. It's that simple. Business meeting, right? And the other party, maybe you're in a negotiation and they're quite contentious and contemptuous and really a jackass. And you're in that meeting and you can be a little triggered by that because you're a human being. If you respond in kind, it's not going to be as wholesome, nor is it as powerful. If you can stay in relative equanimity, let that person go and have their deal and go, that's an interesting point of view. I can't say I agree. And be grounded and quite calm, you can keep negotiating from a place of wholesomeness. Arguably, and according to some research, your outcome's probably going to be better. So meditating, which can seem like a bit of a on the cushion pursuit, like we sit here and do this and it can be helpful in the moment or not helpful, and it feels maybe good or not good, but does it really translate to anything practical? Well, if it translated to you being calmer and more flexible in a contentious business meeting, yahoo. If it translates to you being calmer and more flexible in a personal disagreement with a friend or a lover, yahoo. If it translates to you being more patient and wise with your own mental states, yahoo. There are very practical applications to having a mind that can be calmer and more clear more often. So those are the Four Noble Truths. What are those again? The prescription for why we suffer and how to cease suffering. That's what I spent 13 years trying to figure out. Well, another 30 or 40 since. And when I first heard the Four Noble Truths, it's like I went, oh, damn. I'm going to study this more. That was 25 years ago. One of my favorite stories, she's not here tonight, but a student I've worked with off and on for years in this group, she said, she was, I think, reading a book about the Four Noble Truths at home. And she was at her home-based office desk and in her chair, the wheelie office chairs. And she said, I read the Four Noble Truths and I kind of got it. And I was so excited. I spun around on my chair 3 times and I phoned my son and told him. I thought, that's the right response. It should be like, holy smokes. I suffer because things change. I don't want them to change in a certain way. I hang on to that. That's why I suffer. If I could do that less, I'll suffer less. Here's a path. Yahoo! Yahoo! If I said, here's a magic apple, that's very Snow White-ish. If you eat this apple tonight, you'll suffer way less. You'd eat the apple. I don't have a magic apple. I don't have anything. But what I have is teachings that have been taught for 2,600 years through lineages of teachers. This robe has some symbols drawn on it by my teacher. His teacher drew it on his robe, and so on and so on. Back to the day of Shakyamuni Buddha. Please don't misunderstand that. It doesn't mean I'm special or a super great teacher or super enlightened by any means. But it means that it's an unbroken lineage of these teachings through many really highly realized people and then far less realized people who share teachings that are freely given by Shakyamuni Buddha and the history of teachers to say, here's a prescription for suffering less and being wiser and more compassionate. And where it gets really good, in my biased view, we're not meant to just do this for ourselves. That's a freaking fantastic motivation. But the beauty is, as your mind becomes calmer and more compassionate, you'll be more decent to other people. You'll be more easily moved to help, which is your basic nature. At your best, you're moved to help. When you're open and calm and not stressed, you're pretty likely to help a stranger. That's beautiful. But we practice for ourselves and others, whether we deliberately do or not. That's why at the beginning of every sit or Dharma class, there should always be, it's very traditional, an aspiration, which I did first. I said hi and stuff, and talked about the clash for a bit, but then I did an aspiration. For the sake of all beings was the first line, meaning not just me and all you lovely people and you lovely people, but for the sake of all beings. May we cultivate wisdom, compassion, and non-clinging awareness. If you don't know what non-clinging awareness is, no problem. That can come in time. So, reality, cancer, houses burning down, the various things happening in each and every one of your lives right now, or to people you love, the small ones, the small difficulties, even some petty ones that can really, really distress us a great deal. A great deal. The sufferings. If we all had 5 hours to live, wouldn't it be great if in those last 5 hours we could have a mind that was open and free, curious and loving? Wouldn't it be great if we could have that all the time until we draw our last breath? I'm certainly going to try in my very imperfect way, and I hope you will too. And that brings us to this episode's Love Bite. Are you ready? I hope you are. Stuff is fine. Stuff doesn't create the problem. But when we hang on to wanting something to make us happy, we are writing a prescription for our own misery. Let go, let love show up here and now, and allow the elephant to carry you on its back.